Right now, if you're about to have a baby, there's a team, a doctor, a nurse, maybe an epidural on standby, a monitor beeping your baby's heartbeat back to you in real time. You are, statistically, one of the safest generations of mothers to ever exist. Now strip all of that away, give it a straw mattress, a fire pit, and a locked door, because for most of human history, and for one very specific group of women in the frozen north around 1,000 years ago, giving birth wasn't a medical event. It was a solo trial, a test you passed alone, in a small dark room, while the rest of the village went on with its day like nothing was happening. This is older than midwifery as we know it, older than the hospital, older than the word obstetrics even existed. And the question is, why did Viking women give birth completely alone? And how did an entire society build itself around that one brutal, private moment? Let's go back to the beginning. Start around 800 AD, somewhere in Norway or Iceland. A longhouse, smoke curling out through a roof hole. Inside, families, animals, servants, all crammed into one shared space, except for one small room off to the side with a door that closes. That room had a name. Archaeologists and saga scholars call it, roughly, the birthing house. Sometimes just a curtained-off corner, sometimes a separate little structure entirely. And here's the strange part: when a woman went into labor, the rest of the household didn't rush in. They backed off. Think about that. In a culture built on community, shared meals, shared beds, shared everything, childbirth was the one moment you faced completely by yourself. Why? Here's where it gets interesting. Norse mythology has an actual goddess assigned to this exact moment, Frigg, and beneath her, a whole squad of spirits called the dísir, believed to hover around a birthing woman, invisible, deciding whether she and the baby would live. Historian Neil Price, who spent decades studying Viking belief systems, has argued that Norse life was soaked in this idea of unseen forces watching your most vulnerable moments. Birth wasn't just physically dangerous. It was spiritually loaded. You weren't just having a baby. You were standing at a doorway between worlds, and apparently that doorway worked better with fewer witnesses. So women labored alone, sometimes with just one other woman nearby, not a doctor, not even always a relative, but a specific figure, the hjálpkona, literal woman. Basically an early midwife, minus any of the tools we'd recognize. No forceps, no sterilized anything, no pain relief beyond herbs, hot stones, and, according to some saga accounts, gritting your teeth and pushing against a wooden post driven into the floor specifically for this purpose. Yeah, a push post built into the room. That was the epidural. But here's the thing that made it so dangerous. Viking women weren't just giving birth once. Studies of Scandinavian skeletal remains, including analysis published on Norse burial sites, suggest women in this era were dying in their 20s and 30s at drastically higher rates than men, and childbirth complications are one of the leading suspects. Historians estimate maternal mortality in this period may have hovered somewhere around 1 in 50 births ending in the mother's death. And remember, most women weren't giving birth once. They were doing this 5, 6, 7 times across a lifetime. Run those odds enough times, and giving birth wasn't just painful. It was closer to a recurring roll of the dice with your life on the table. Here's what makes this so important. Because Viking society knew this, and instead of pretending it wasn't happening, they built rituals directly around the risk. If a woman survived, there was often a naming ceremony. The child wasn't even fully considered alive, in a legal or spiritual sense, until water was poured over it and a name was spoken, sometimes by the father, sometimes days later. Historians studying Norse law codes note that this wasn't sentimental. It was practical. Infant mortality was brutally high, so some cultures delayed full emotional and legal investment until the baby had a better shot at surviving. But if the mother died, the sagas don't look away from that either. Old Norse literature is full of women who die in childbirth, and it's treated with a kind of grim respect, not swept under the rug, but spoken of almost like she died in battle. In fact, there's a genuinely wild detail here. Some scholars, including those studying Norse concepts of the afterlife, have pointed out that dying while giving birth may have been seen as honorable enough to earn a woman a place in Falakvangur, the goddess Freyja's afterlife field, traditionally reserved for the slain. Think about that for a second. In a warrior culture obsessed with dying gloriously in combat, they carved out equal respect for a woman who died alone in a small room, pushing a person into the world with nothing but hot stones and a wooden post. That's not a footnote. That's the culture admitting, quietly, that childbirth was its own kind of war. So the isolation wasn't neglect. It was almost the opposite. It was so sacred, so dangerous, so spiritually charged that the community treated it like something you couldn't just casually observe, you didn't get to watch. You waited outside the door, listening, while one woman fought a battle nobody else could fight for her. And slowly, as Viking-age Scandinavia shifted into the medieval period and Christianity spread north, some of this changed. Churches took over naming rituals, midwifery became slightly more organized, prayers replaced the dísir. But the core of it, woman, alone, in a small room, facing the single most dangerous moment of her life. That barely changed for another 800 years, right up until hospitals and modern medicine finally showed up and, frankly, kicked the door open. So here's the full picture. It starts with a locked door in a smoky longhouse. It runs through a goddess and her invisible watchers. It runs through a post worn smooth by generations of hands. It runs through mortality odds that would terrify anyone reading this today. And it ends with sagas that gave dying mothers a warrior's afterlife because everyone quietly understood exactly what she'd survived or hadn't. And that brings us back to you. Next time you're anywhere near a hospital, a maternity ward, an ultrasound machine, remember that for most of human history, that entire process happened behind one closed door, with one woman, one helper if she was lucky, and absolutely no guarantee she'd walk back out. Being born has always been dangerous, but surviving to give birth again. For a huge stretch of human history, that was one of the bravest, quietest things a person could do, and almost nobody was watching. If you want more stories like this, real history, told through the people who actually lived it, stick around. There's a lot more of, or past, worth uncovering.